Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I know you're a busy guy.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I've got so many questions specifically for you because OfferZen came into my life at a time when I'd never heard of anything quite like it, and I think I mentioned to you, my brother is the technical director at a big company, and he said to me, Nix, you're really into recruitment, you're into technology, you have to hear about these guys and what they're up to, because as somebody who would become a customer of OfferZen's, he was just saying this, it's something different. So I'm going to put it in my words, what I think of OfferZen, what it is, and no, actually, I'm going to ask you first. You
No,
tell us.
I would love to hear yours first.
No, I want to hear yours first.
Oh, I was really looking forward to that.
You'll still tell you.
Yeah. So I mean, the technical thing is we're a talent marketplace, right? So, but really, what we are is a way for developers to find really great opportunities and for companies to find really great developers. And we do that through a platform where instead of candidates applying to jobs, companies find candidates on our platform where we add them once a week, and they reach out and send them a message and see if they're interested in talking to them. Yeah, so that's us in a nutshell. I'd love to hear yours.
So it's Tinder for companies and developers.
Well,
Like a
yeah, I guess
dating
that
site,
was
like
always
the
the one at the
ultimate
start.
dating
People
site,
saying,
right?
yeah, I mean, it's less. I mean, I suppose hiring people is in a sense like dating, but it's definitely more long term than Tinder.
So
It's
for
more
sure.
fine. It's more
Maybe
like
not
your
Tinder,
old
but it's
school.
just the one that
Yeah,
everybody knows, right? Maybe Bumble or Hitched.
maybe. I don't know any of these, but I've heard of them. And yeah, you know, definitely. I think the Tinder for recruiting is probably not the right thing though as well. I think like a lot of what people did when, because we can talk about this later, I guess, but like recruiting has been broken for a while. If you go onto Google and say recruiting is, there's never nice things that people talk about. And a lot of what tech folks do is they typically go, let's just remove all the humans. Like it's the humans that are the problem
Yeah.
with recruiting. And while that may be true, because humans are an interesting bunch and we cause a lot of problems, ultimately recruiting is about people, and it's people finding work from other people, and that is a human thing that needs to be done. You can't actually remove people completely from that process because it just doesn't work. So that was one of
Humans are
the things we
essential
learned
to
early
the
on.
recruitment.
We didn't exactly, we didn't want it to be a just a plain platform, tech platform where there are no people. Like people often get upset when they think, oh, but aren't you just like Uber or Airbnb or Tinder for recruiting, where there are no people involved? And we very much have like a team of people who are speaking to candidates and speaking to the customers at our employers as well, because we believe that actually adds a huge amount of value. So
No, for sure.
I
And I
think
think that is a massive differentiator. I mean, you can see that the candidates that have come to OfferZen have been supported in terms of who really are you and what are you actually looking for, and making sure that their profiles align with the right kind of companies. You would hope so. I imagine that's the end goal, right? Is to support both the customer as well as the candidate. And because I know in my dealings with OfferZen, there's been a real solid element of finding out about the companies that I work for and what the culture is, so that there's a lot of thought that's being put into it, a lot of care.
Yeah, when we started the company, we actually stuck something up on the wall saying, do what's best for the developer. And that was something that we always like wanted to do, like in any decision, just like do that. And because very much at that, and like tech talent's always high in demand. I think we're going through one of those. I've been through a few downturns in the last 15 years. And we're going through one of those at the moment, where there's still more jobs than there are people for them, but the power's shifted a little bit in the sense that people can be a little bit more picky, and there's a lot better talent on the market at the moment and kind of stuff. But that changes, and I think when we started OfferZen, we were in that like boom time kind of thing where everyone there's huge demand for talent, which we've gone through recently again as well. And always just remembering doing things that make the experience great for the developer will be good for the customer who comes to find them, because ultimately that's what they're looking for, is really good talent. And if we can bring really good developers, make a good experience for them, then customers will come.
Nice. I want to go back to what you were mentioning there to do with people, because one of my real sort of areas of interest within recruitment, especially now with AI and a lot of automation happening, it's like recruitment is having its day in terms of tools. And I'm having a lot of fun, like diving into all the different things that could be automated and what shouldn't be automated, and where the human is actually highlighted as a result of this. Like what should always be left to the human. And an aspect of that is soft skills. So in my hiring, I'm encouraged to weight technical skills and soft skills equally, which I found really, really interesting and quite challenging as well, because like, how do you measure for like humility or
Quite subjective, yeah.
Exactly. And like,
and it's very dependent on like how you feel at the time of talking to that person too.
Yeah, and how that person communicates themselves. You know, they could be the most humble, hardworking, game-changing, extraordinary A player, but if they're having a bad day, you know, you might miss out on whatever. So anyway, so those are the challenges. How is OfferZen approaching that side of things, like the human, as opposed to just their technical abilities and their experience and exposure?
Interesting point. I mean, so I think the question is, though, is I think ultimately we leave that up to our customers to determine, like in terms of how they're hiring.
Their culture.
So yeah, and their culture and everything. And while we may have opinions on how people should do it, like it's ultimately up to you. We have thousands of different customers and they have different ways of hiring, some good, some bad, many in between. And really it's up to them how they do their hiring and how they run their own business.
That makes sense.
And I think there's obviously a lot of hype around AI, and I think the way we think about it is, and this is a very common thing people say, it's not AI is going to take your job, it's the person using AI who will probably take your job. And I think that's definitely the approach we take. It's how can we use, and that's always been the approach actually before AI, but how can technology make you better at what you're doing? How can we use technology to reduce inefficiencies? How can we use technology to make things faster and better? And that's kind of how we'd initially, founded OfferZen in that sense as well, thinking about like, how can we use tech to make you better at recruiting, or have a better way of sourcing talent, or better way of finding jobs.
And just to kind of answer my own question there, I'm remembering that on the OfferZen profiles for the candidates, there's an area right at the top of each profile which outlines what that individual wants. And I think that's quite indicative and kind of lends towards the soft skills side of things, because you can learn a lot about somebody in terms of what they say in that particular paragraph. And that's kind of where you can look at the cultural hook potentially.
It's really interesting though. Like my background is in recruiting as well, and so I've done a lot of recruiting and spoken to lots of people who've done recruiting in companies and seen a broad spectrum over the years. And I just find hiring is really hard, and it's fraught with like lots of different. You're trying to make a decision and a snap judgment on someone really quickly, and we as humans are effectively biased machines. Like our brains work in the way of taking shortcuts. We go, don't use too much energy, like find a shortcut for something. And that's where all these biases come in. And why I'm mentioning that is like that 100% that like we make a big thing about putting like, I remember in the early days with candidates, like I'd actually sit and help them figure out how to write their, what do I want next from my jobs. And people would I'd make sure they go into a lot of effort, because we really wanted people to have really great profiles on OfferZen when we started. And what I found interesting in speaking directly to people who we've done that with, people would like over filter because of like someone writing a little bit too much or a little bit too little. And it's just these like subtleties. It's like someone says, I would really like to work in AI because that's what it says in the thing. And then the person reading that on the other end, who's the employer, goes, oh, we don't do any AI, so I'm not going to talk to that person. Yeah. And you're like, hey, but hang on, have you thought about just this person wrote this thing and said, this is what I'd love to do. And maybe if you just contacted them and said, here's what we do, and they said yes or no, you could decide, maybe you have a conversation. Like you don't have to stop it there and then. And I found so many people who literally, in the early days, you're speaking to like you're recruiting your customers, right? You're literally finding your like in our case, finding candidates, finding the employers like directly and speaking to them individually. And yeah, I spoke to so many people who I just find these like weird things going on. You can either like overfilter or underfilter completely. Yeah.
Assumptions. I think the bias thing is quite interesting as well. It's something else I think about a lot. And instinct and intuition and all of those very human things that we do consciously, unconsciously. You know, you first meet somebody, that first 5 to 10 seconds, and your gut instinct, and it comes from experience and the exposure that you've had to all the people that you have in your life and on different levels. I think that there's power in that. I think that there's something really interesting and important in it, but also to potentially be careful of it. Yeah,
you have to be prepared to be wrong, because I think so often we're right in that, and then you reflect back on it and it's confirmation bias. Now you're going, oh, I was right, so therefore I'm always right. But I think you have to be prepared to be wrong on your snap-second judgment, like and
hiring especially, you know,
in hiring and in life, right? Like I've met, there's many, and as we said this earlier, it's like my snap-second judgment of you or anyone is not only dependent on how you interact with me, it's how I'm feeling at that very moment in time and how I interact with what you're putting out in front of me, you know. And it could be we could be having off days, you know, and now we've made completely different judgments of one another. So I think you have to be prepared to be wrong, but you also have to trust your gut, but be mindful that, like, hey, hang on, did I miss something? Like, don't always just be a zealot and trust your gut. Like, maybe you were wrong.
No, for sure. Okay, so just to jump back to the OfferZen side of things, one thing as a recruiter that I've really appreciated is that I don't think a lot of people think about this. When applicants or candidates apply for a job, I think there's a lot of recruiters or people involved in the hiring process that don't realize that this person is a specialist in whatever they're a specialist in. They're not a specialist in presenting themselves in a CV.
Yes.
You know, and that's where you guys have really stepped in and filled a gap. I think you've obviously hired in your teams people who are good at doing that in a particular way and packaging and presenting a candidate in a way that they couldn't do. And I think that that's really been a good thing for the South African market and internationally now.
Yeah, the goals with those teams is to not package for them, but to help people package for themselves. So really around like how our talent advisors at OfferZen are really there to help people think better about how they present themselves and how they handle themselves at interviews and everything, because it's tough. You don't know, like, you learn surprisingly little about how to find a job throughout your life growing up. You get surprisingly bad advice from people you trust throughout your life around finding a job and interactions that you might take. Hiring is sort of seen as like a zero-sum game to be played with people. And I think the problem with it is that there's this information asymmetry. If I'm hiring and I'm advertising a job, you know, I know more about it than you do. I know the salary, I know all these things that you don't know. And when you don't know something, you inherently mistrust the other person in some way.
Or you kind of, it's like a power play, right? So they have 100%. Information, yeah.
And so when there's that information asymmetry at play, there's always a bit of weird friction that people aren't quite open or themselves. And I find it very interesting because, like I said earlier, it's also hiring is actually more akin to like, it's a closer thing to like marriage than Tinder, right? Like, you're going to spend quite a lot of time with these people, more so, like probably more than you spend with your own family at some point.
That's true, yeah.
And so you want to make sure you're making like the right decisions. So people are like, it's a big thing to do. So people are quite scared about like making the wrong choice in hiring.
Well, there's a massive cost that comes with making the wrong choice as well. And you also don't want to do that to the candidate, right? You don't want to put them in a situation. In the last 2 jobs that I've had, there's been a really great focus on this person that I'm interviewing for a potential position. It's like their happiness, their fulfillment, their progress, as well as like, are we as this company going to be able to give them what they are looking for? And I really like how the power has shifted in that way, because historically, and you know this as well as I do, it was about, well, we're the employer, we're over here, and are you good enough for us? Was always the message.
Yes.
With you, and it's just not the case anymore. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, and we're quite bad at that in South Africa specifically, I think still. And I think maybe it's to do with the macroeconomic conditions a bit, and that like there's such large unemployment in this country that especially when you deal with like larger organizations, people who are hiring there are used to, recruiting for many different roles. So they're like, they have this attitude of, someone would be lucky to have a job, or you'd be lucky to work here, kind of thing. And I see that a lot less in Europe, where else we operate, because they're more in a talent scarce market and whatnot. But it's definitely a problem. Like people have seen, employees like resources for a long time, and like I think when you treat people like objects, no good comes of it. Like you don't treat people, you literally don't treat them like people when you see them as an object. Yeah, like I'm a big proponent of, I think like I mentioned earlier, like we wanted to make OfferZen a great experience. So candidate experience is just, it's a buzzword in recruiting for a while now. But like genuinely it is a like can be a big strategic advantage for you, right? If you're like like all things said and done, if you've got two jobs that are like same salary, working on challenging things, it's ultimately the people who you meet and work with and are going to work with that'll sway the decision. And the simplest thing to do in candidate experience, it's complete, like people always thinking, oh, what are these hacks, what can we do, what can we spend money on, where can we find tech and everything. It's just be nice, just be a human, treat people, treat this person like another person, call them by their name, don't call them a candidate, call them by their name. Because if you call them by their name, you actually start to treat them like a person. So I think like whenever I find weird stuff happening in recruiting, it's usually because we're treating someone like an object. And when you treat someone like an object, you aren't held by the same rules of how am I going to treat you next, versus like the candidate. Like you can say and do many different things to the candidate or the resource or the employee than you can to, hey, next,
No, it's not difficult to differentiate, I think, as a company, when it comes to that, like treating people as human beings. It's not hard. Like it should never.
People struggle with this though, hey? They really do. They look for every other solution. And like I say this often, it's like I came off a call earlier today. Just
don't be
like,
a dick.
Don't be a dick. Treat people like people, focus on what's in your control and do those things. And that's completely free. And that is better than worrying about, you can't control what other people are doing. Who cares? Like, just be nice.
I only knew about CX as customer experience up until about 6 months ago. And I was like, oh yeah, totally works for candidate experience as well.
Well, you have to, I believe in hiring, you have to treat candidates like your customers, right? Like we spend, hiring in general is actually more akin to sales and marketing than anything else. The problem is that people treat it like a filtering exercise. How do I've got all of this rubbish, how do I find the best of the bunch? That's how people typically approach hiring. Now, yes, this is the funnel, and sales and marketing is also usually a funnel, but it's not about like getting rid of the people. It's about trying to get people to want to join your mission as a company. And if you treat hiring as if it's a sales and marketing activity, and first and foremost, your role in hiring and recruiting is about getting someone who doesn't work at your company to want to work at your company, that's the most important thing.
It's so cool to hear you saying this stuff, because it's exactly what we've been doing for the last year at TerraFlow. So when I joined, I was initially challenged with finding 500 engineers in 5 years. And I thought, yes, I want to do that. I have no idea how I'm going to, but it just sounds like a really cool challenge. So let me think about this. And then we came up with the idea that, like, hang on a second, if Netflix and Google and AWS and Tesla and all of them have got all of the engineers waiting in the wings, how did they do that? Why have they got the talent pool? Why can they just pick from wherever they want? So what are the things that those engineers are believing about those particular companies? And let's get them all coming to us in the same way. Like, let's build the culture, let's do the remote work, let's provide the cool tech, like whatever it is that these particular creatures are looking for, like let's make this their best home. And we did, and it's been working incredibly well. So I speak the same language as you.
Yeah. And it's not about, people have been thinking about that for years. Like when we first started OfferZen, as you see, like on our OfferZen profiles, we had like perks that companies offered. And I remember speaking to people who had struggled with this, like, but we don't have like, this is the days of like, oh, but we don't have a foosball table and we don't do these kinds of things. And I'm like, no one gives a shit about that stuff. No one cares like about those things. And it's even if you feel like you've got very limited things, it's really about how do you treat people. And because people really other people resonate to being treated like a human being. And the thing is people like to think of solutions that are like immediately scalable. It's like, oh, I can roll this thing out and now everyone will hear about it. Whereas if you do whereas treating individuals like a person isn't inherently scalable, so people don't lean towards it as a solution. But over time, that really compounds, like we as humans speak to one another, right? Like how does everyone, like you get recommendations on restaurants, on whatever, anything you buy or anything you do is recommended from someone because there's now this like trust proxy that someone has said, talk to this person or do this thing. And there's no difference with recruiting and hiring. Nowadays, there's you as an employer are held accountable to how you treat every single person, not only your employees, but like interviewers, people you interview, because people can just go to Glassdoor.
Exactly.
And think of that, like you are held accountable to every single person who you interact with as a business.
The transparency is brilliant. I think it's really, really cool in terms of that power shift,
Exactly. And those that does become scalable, because if you actually treat every individual like a human being and treat them well over time, that does scale. And it's and the opposite is also very true. It scales in the negative too. And you'll never know about it. You'll just not see candidates, and you'll just think that the market's tougher than always. Yeah.
So we did a bunch of internal interviews and put them up on YouTube. My whole idea was I wanted to give whoever was interested in joining TerraFlow a look under the hood. And the people to tell that story are the people who are actually there.
100%.
Go down the rabbit hole. And there's so much content there that they could spend, a couple of days just looking at all of the different interviews, and the CEO talking and the head of revenue talking and whatever about all the different things that we're up to. So that's been a pretty cool thing for the marketing as hiring.
Yeah, and there's a big focus now as well internationally. Recruiting teams are getting quite advanced now, and it's not so uncommon to have you've got your talent acquisition team, the recruiters sourcing people, but then you've got your talent marketers, like that's their job.
I've seen a couple of jobs like that. Very interesting. Makes sense to me.
Makes total sense. And then you've got your talent operations, so there's now data and like systems and tooling and everything. So those kinds of companies those are the kinds of roles you'll have in a sales and a marketing organization. And it's very similar, like build out, if you're gonna, like you mentioned, Netflix and everything like that, those kinds of companies are recruiting machines, but it's not just an army of recruiters. There's like talent marketing, there's operations that goes into the back end. So they're really treating it like it's just as important to acquire talent as it is to acquire customers, just as important.
I think we've had a similar length of time in recruitment in terms of our careers. I've been doing this for about 15 years. I think you're around the same.
2006,
right? Yeah. So
just
how cool is it to see how much more seriously hiring is being taken now than it was like 10 years ago in terms of, I don't know, I feel like recruiters and the sort of strategic side of what we do is so much more valued than it ever was before. Maybe I've just been choosing better and better companies to work with.
I'm trying to zoom out a bit, and I definitely agree with you.
Sales position and seen like, oh God, recruitment, as you said, like gets a bit of a bad rap. I feel like that's changing as people are realizing how important it is to first of all pull in the right people and get that right in terms of the bottom line at the end of the day.
Yeah, you know what? I definitely agree. I think what is interesting is in the middle of the tech boom in now 2021, beginning of 2022, just after COVID, what do you think was the most in demand job at tech companies?
Recruiters?
Yeah, not software engineers, recruiters. Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because recruiters are the ones building the company, and I think I actually think especially building an internal recruiting team and a really good one. I think if you think of, again, I said what makes two companies who have the same product beat one another? It's down to the people they've got in the team. It's down to that team. So the recruiters who are sourcing people and growing those companies are like the lifeblood and the unsung heroes of these companies, right? Like you've got all these awesome startups and scale-ups around the world being scaled up, but no one talks about, everyone talks about the engineers.
Yeah,
Everyone talks about
how
like what
was
they're
it?
doing.
Yeah, who were the people
Yeah,
who actually built
but
that?
actually the people who build that are the recruiting teams, right? They're going out there and building, and they're definitely like the unsung heroes of like startups and company building around the world. And no one really gives that enough of a thing, I think.
Okay, so this was supposed to be my first question for you, and we're halfway in, so that's a sign of a great interview. What was the inspiration? How did it all kind of come together in terms of OfferZen? Like, was it a light bulb moment with you? I know you've got other partners.
Yeah, trying to think of the best way to answer that. So it definitely wasn't. Yeah, I have two other co-founders. I'm one of three. Milan and Phil are two brothers, and they have been involved in startups for a long, long time. I think Milan had started a company called Fire ID, mobile security, a long time ago when he was still at university, and scaled that up, and then eventually that went on to like starting other companies like SnapScan and then Luno and a few others. And so they were in the US for about a year or so, securing funding and trying to grow out one of the other companies. And they had decided at that time, like, of all the times they were growing companies, it was always just so hard to find the right people. But yet they knew so many really good engineers and really good people who like they would jump at, but it was always hard to like find them at the right time. And similarly, there were always really cool companies and people doing really great stuff that it was hard for those engineers to find those things. And whenever you start a company, one of the challenges you're never going to completely solve is hiring and talent acquisition. So they're like, all the companies that started, like, how do we solve this problem? So that was a thing they started working on. And I was running a recruitment agency at the time in South Africa, and they just moved back. So from the US, and we're looking to find out more about the recruiting market in South Africa. And I got a call from Milan. We hadn't spoken before, but I knew who he was, and said they were looking at doing something in online recruiting space. And I said, well, yeah, like me too. And we met half an hour later at my office and had very similar ideas about things. And it was just, it was crazy. And I remember going back to my
I love those moments. It's so
wife
cool.
was 6 months pregnant at the time, and I was just like, I've got this like thing that is just like my literal like dreams kind of fall in my lap. How do I cannot in my life. At first I had to talk my way into getting into it, but then and then from there I was like, how could I live my life not taking this opportunity? There's huge amounts of risk and everything in doing it, but like I couldn't fast forward 20-30 years and say I didn't try it. So that was how we kind of met and started things. But I think really like the Milan and Phil have done a huge amount. They are just next level in terms
Sounds
of
like it. So did they co-found SnapScan and Luno as well?
Yeah, so Milan put together the founding team at Luno. So there was the founding team at Luno, and then they founded SnapScan out of Milan's incubator called Fire ID, back when they were like early 20s.
Both South Africans.
At Stellenbosch University and stuff. So done some pretty cool stuff. Really
I love a
interesting.
brilliant South African story. There's loads of them.
Yeah. So I think but again, the key thing for us is really around there's really great people in the world, and we believe that developers and people building tech can really make a huge impact in the world, both negative and positive. But we like to believe that people are going to do the right things.
Really want to as well, right? That's like
there's actually in most things, and I think in South Africa specifically, we're always taught that everyone's out to get you. Be wary, be cautious of people. But actually, it's very few people. And I've had to realize that's not actually how life goes. Actually, most people are honest and just trying to be nice. And very few people aren't. So I think in terms of tech, we believe that people are trying to build can really make a huge positive impact in the world, and we want more people to be able to be connected and find work. yeah, so that's the goal is really to be able to scale
That's
this
awesome.
out into
Noble cause. I love it. So what's coming next? What are you guys working on? I know there's a tech slump internationally in South Africa as well, and everybody's being affected. But I can tell that from how we opened up this chat that you've been through that before. You've seen it. You know how to weather storms. What do you see coming next for OfferZen, for the tech industry, whatever comes to your mind?
I mean, I think we're definitely gonna keep going, ups and downs. I think we're in the middle of like the last few years since COVID have been crazy. It was, there was like crazy down because of COVID, and then there was like crazy up, and then there's been like a deflation of the whole tech scene for a while, but that's just a cyclical thing. It's definitely gonna change. I think AI is obviously it's a huge buzzword over the last year, and I think like everyone now has like an AI for this, AI for that, but it's definitely going to have a huge impact on everything everyone does. So if like things like ChatGPT and Copilot and all these things can basically write code for people, then like why do we need, like, will companies keep needing so many developers? And I think that's an obvious assumption to, I think, make. You're like, okay, well, yeah, you can make people more productive, and you could probably get code to write itself, or like, get people to write code easier, so therefore you don't need as many. But actually, it's all kind of the more things you start building, the more people you end up needing, and it actually just ends up scaling up even further. So I think the more that we get a big tech boom and tech, like big shifts like AI and stuff, it actually isn't, it's only going to continue to increase the reliance on tech and people that know it. So yeah, expecting things to go up again, and then at some point down again, and then up again.
It's like it
That's
always
just the
has,
roller
always
coaster.
will. I got to tell
Yeah,
you,
it's no different.
when you got your background blurred like you do there, and you're quite expressive with your hands, every time you do this, we see stars.
Oh, right.
There's stars behind. Just do it
Funny.
slowly, you just see. No,
Oh,
like
okay.
that. Yeah,
No.
it's little
Okay.
twinkles. It's cool.
That's not an effect. I haven't done that.
A filter, yeah. But just last thing,
Oh.
you made an interesting point there. When you say that the barrier to entry is really low with recruiters coming into a company, there's so many bad, like, internal recruiters, even in agencies or whatever. You think about the first person who hired that recruiter. They wouldn't have known how to hire a recruiter. The first person hiring a recruiter, because they're not a recruiter, it would have been like a founder or something who would have a good sense of, technically maybe what they want, but is this a decent person who's going to have the soft skills and so on that we started talking about? First person to hire an internal recruiter is not necessarily going to be a recruiter with much hiring experience.
No, but I think if you're like, I'm just not talking about, like, I suppose, startups and stuff. I think if you're a founder, your role is hiring. Like, that is your job. And if you look at like the stories of Google and like Airbnb and all these really good companies, those founders were interviewing the first, like, and they said they personally interviewed the first 500 hires. Now to interview, like, they might not have started the first one, maybe like the last round interview, but like that means they probably personally interviewed thousands of people, right? But not just those 500. And your job as a founder of a company is getting people to join your mission, and that's hiring. So I think, like, in terms of hiring a recruiter, yes, you might not know, if you're a founder and you're starting a company, you might
But
not
you'd
know how
know
to
what you need and
hire a recruiter.
what you had to do, and if that person could then step into where you were strong.
Yeah, do you want this person, do you think this person can convey your story and get other people to want to join your mission? I think is like super important. And then I suppose the technical stuff of, like, I don't know, like, there's, how do you find people? Well, you either have people coming to you or you go out and find them. And depending on the kind of recruiter you have, like, they might actually be able to go and find them, or they might just be someone who's used to having someone come to them. But at least the most important, I think, that all those things, skills can be learned. But I think, like, are there someone who you want on your mission? Can they get people to join?
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about that. It makes total sense that that's essentially what you are as a founder, is somebody who is there to identify and build the dream team, obviously. but I hadn't thought about it. So that's.
I mean, think of all the people. I suppose all the place. If you imagine the place you work now, it would have been the same thing. You're getting the people who, like the founders of the business, the ones who are probably getting you to join, right, and selling you the mission.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly what I do for them, with them, right? Is tell the story in the right ways. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think I would, we hired an internal recruiter when we were like 50 people. I would, if I decided to start another company at some point after a long break between, I would definitely hire a recruiter early on. If I was,
really?
Going on that thing, like probably like 10 people. If you're at 10 and you're gonna, like, maybe you raise funding or something, or you're onto something and you can hire more, but you're gonna be hiring and growing to, like, if you're at 10 and you plan to grow to 20.
Why do you say that now, that that wasn't the case last time around?
Like, I think we, I suppose, okay, so like I come from a recruiting background and everything, so, but also the other founders and other people in the team, we believe that, like, you as the person hiring really need to be involved in hiring, both from, like, writing out what you want, like advertising it, actually like sourcing people yourself and finding them. I think, like, you have to feel that pain of hiring a little bit to really appreciate it, because it's hard. It's really not easy. Like, getting people to talk to you, like, it's a sales aspect. It's like going out and getting people to come to you is not easy. And I think it's important for people to value that and understand it. As a hiring manager, I'm sure you'll know from the hiring managers you've worked with, it's the ones that are like, that's not my job, it's your job. Those ones are the ones who struggle with hiring the most. You struggle to place people with them. Whereas the ones who, like, they actually get that recruiting is, like, the most important thing.
I'm trying to find you someone that you think is amazing. So it's your time, and I'll do that.
Exactly. And so, but why would I hire a recruiter earlier? I just think, like, when we did, it just made such a big impact, because if you're now having to spend 2-3 hours a day or more on, like, not only interviewing but also, like, sourcing and top of funnel, all that kind of stuff, it just takes away from being able to do the work that you want to do. And so having a good recruiter is a huge multiplier on your productivity and time as a small, like, fast growing company.
I just was interested as to why you'd come to that realization now, like that idea that if I do it again, I'm going to bring in a recruiter sooner. And I get you on the time saved, and also maybe now how to identify exactly the right type of person to do the hiring with you, as a result of your experience.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Okay. Boom. Great. Well, thank you so much, Brett. This has been super cool, like really, really interesting to pick your brain, and just really appreciate your time and what you're doing with OfferZen. It's made hiring a breeze for me in 2 companies now.
That's awesome. Thanks. Yeah, well, hopefully it continues to do that.